Good evening all, welcome to my weekly Node-RED development live stream. Here for 90 minutes or so, a bit less maybe, of just working on some Node-RED code development. Cracking through some issues both on the backlog and some things I've noted in the week that need tackling before we do the next maintenance release of Node-RED. So if you're here, do say hi in the chat. I can see Softy2K, Jim Bob Squelchy. Hi guys, great to have you back. If you're watching the replay on YouTube, please do leave a comment, like and subscribe and all that jazz. But otherwise, I'm going to just crack straight in. It's going to be one of those weeks. There's 3 or 4 different issues I've got on the backlog that I'm going to try tackling, and we're just going to work our way through and see where we get to. And to be honest with you, I've got an easy one to begin with, which will ease us in. So let's get started. So what are we going to look at? Well, I say some issues on the backlog. There's, if you've seen the title of the video or the caption, there's a common theme to a lot of the issues I'm going to look at tonight, which is around if you've got project mode enabled in the editor, when you switch projects and open up a different project, they spotted a few little, I spotted a few issues when I was getting a conference talk ready a couple of weeks ago. And it's always the way. You're trying to prepare a demo for a talk. You stumble across a bunch of issues. You don't have time to start fixing them. So I've got post-it notes with some notes of some issues written down. But we did actually get an issue get raised a few days ago around that very scenario, switching projects. It looks like we're not clearing out global context properly. But that's the general area we're going to be looking at. But before we do that, there is this issue that I just reminded myself about, which we're going to quickly knock off the list because this should be super quick. This should be a 5-minute job. So, 5-minute job, we'll see. So what have we got? So this is saying with the inject node, if you remove the message.payload entry in its rules, then whenever you edit the node from then on and just OK without making any changes, it's getting the dirty flag saying something has changed. So, let's see that in action. If I just come over empty workspace, drag in an inject node, I delete the payload. I'm just going to hit deploy so I have it. Just shuffled it onto the grid, get rid of the lint warning that flashed up there. So if I open it and just hit done, so not making any changes, is getting the dirty flag set. So that's the first thing to fix, because we haven't changed anything. So why is the editor saying something has changed? And the key to this is I've opened out the info panel and expanded the node properties. So this gives you the raw view of the actual node properties in the JSON. Have a look down here at payload type. See how in its current configuration it's undefined. Now watch what happens when I double click on this node to open up its edit dialog. Payload type has been changed to string or str. And when I hit done, it goes back to undefined. So what's going on is there's a bug in the onEdit prepare for this node that is setting payload type to str as a kind of a default value. And it shouldn't be doing that. onEdit prepare shouldn't be modifying the node properties, because when I hit done, the editor is looking at the current node properties and comparing them to what they've been set to work out what's changed. And when I hit done, the onEdit save function is setting it to undefined. And so the comparison as far as the editor, it's spotted it's changed from this string value to undefined, which is a change, even though it didn't start out as a string property. Does that make sense? Anyway, that's that issue, and we're going to quickly just go squash it. Let's just see how we're doing. Yep, stream's holding up. Good stuff. So let's just go fix that. It should be super quick, should be super apparent in the code where that is. So just waiting for the editor to wake up. So we go to the inject nodes HTML file. It's going to be in, well, we can look for this one of two ways. Quick way is, we know it's the payload type property that's changing. So we want to go and look for when does the payload type value change, and it's probably going to be this.payload type. Except no. That's in onEdit save, so that's after the fact. Now let's just collapse the code down to make it. Is it going to do it? No, it's not going to do it. Okay, we're going to have to step through it. Here's onEdit prepare. Right, yeah, here we are. Here we go. So, in fact, you can see it right at the start here. You can see it's checking the values and then it's initializing the values to different things. And that's what it shouldn't be doing. It should be initializing local variables. So what we are going to do is we're going to introduce a new variable here, payload type. Is it just payload type we care about? Yeah. And we're going to start by setting that to node.payload type. Oop. And then on all of the, wherever here we've got this additional logic which is resetting its value, we're going to now reset our local variable rather than the, make sure that logic all holds up. Yep. So that means we now are changing the local variable, not the node property directly. But now we just need to make sure we go find wherever we make use of node.payload type, and instead of that, we need to use this new local variable payload type. And I think there's going to be a few places that crops up. Okay, so now we've got it down to there's only 4 places we reference node.payload type, which are these 4 at the start of onEdit prepare. So fairly certain that's now updated all the other references. If I just check this.payload type, that's okay. Yeah, we're in onEdit save at this point, and we're allowed to muck around with it in onEdit save. And we're only reading it in this function. Cool, that all looks good. So let's save. Reload. Hey, Baker Balls. Very well. All is good, thanks. So with the $bracket, does Node-RED use jQuery? Yes. So jQuery is one of the only external JavaScript libraries we use. jQuery and D3 are the 2 libraries we use, but yeah, we use jQuery extensively. So what are we doing? So yeah, here we've got the inject node. I've just reloaded to get that change in. Just reload again to be sure. So we edit the node, I hit done, and it's not marked as changed, which is awesome. But let's just go in and add in payload as a Boolean type. Hit done. Let's check its property table. Okay, and then edit it. Payload is still Boolean type, which is good. Let's change its type to number. That's good. Yeah, so that's all working. And then we just get rid of that property. That's all working. Awesome. So that's that issue fixed. What are we? 10 minutes into the stream and our first issue is fixed. So let's just go through the process. Git checkout branch inject fix. Then just review the changes. So rather than changing the node property directly, we change a local variable. Avoids us resetting things unnecessarily. do not modify inject node props in on edit prepare. Fixes, what's the issue number? 3241. 3241. So just commit that, and we'll wait for my Mac to sign the commit. There we are. Then we do a git and a shortcut I've got which pushes this to a new branch on the remote and tracks it. And then use the link that GitHub give us back in the commit message. We can one-click open the pull request, and yeah, just going to leave it like that. So that's from our inject fix branch into master. It's a bug fix, so we go to master, not dev. Hit create pull request. Awesome, and we're done on that issue. And I'm not going to. I'll merge that before we do the next release. So let's go back to the master branch and just set it running again. Now we're going to look at some of these other issues that I mentioned at the start. So I'm just going to, this is the one we've just fixed. So label it as fixed. It will get closed automatically when we merge that pull request. But if I label it fixed, it just looks better on the issue list. Problem with context variables. Right. So the issue report is when changing project, the global context variables are kept for the new project. And the expected behavior, quite reasonably, is when you change projects, the globals ought to be cleared as well. So let's see what's going on. So Node is running. Let us just reload, just to get a clean workspace. Well, let's make use of that inject node. And let's add a change node. And we're going to inject a payload of a timestamp. Just, it's easy, it's randomly generated. And then we're going to set global.test to the value of message.payload. Okay. So deploy that. We open up the context sidebar. In fact, I'm just going to drag that tab button to the start so it always shows this one because we're going to want that quite a lot. I inject, and if I refresh there, you can see global context has that one. Now, what I'm also going to do is same again, but this time I'm going to set flow.test. Just deploy that. So let's run flow.test, and now when I refresh and refresh, okay. Although that's slightly less meaningful because, anyway, don't worry. It's the global stuff we care about for the moment. So what we're going to do now is go to the project menu, open, and we're going to switch over to, say, interesting. Where's that? Slightly confused. Okay, linter test flows we're going to go to. I hit open. And there's a bunch of stuff in here. Now let's hit refresh on global. And sure enough, test is still there. And let's just verify that. Yeah, let's just make sure that isn't some just rogue bit of data cached in the editor. We'll create a new flow that injects, sets payload to the global value of global.test and pass that to a debug node. And when we inject it, sure enough, okay, it is pulling that value out. Right, so this is actually going to be in the runtime side of things. So where do we go look for this? where we want to go looking. So we're in the packages, node modules at node red, and we want to go into the runtime folder. And I realize a lot of the fixes I've been doing in recent weeks have tended to be editor and node stuff. So this can be a slightly rarer dip into the runtime logic. Under lib, we have, I'm just trying to remember where it lives now. Is it under flows? No, it's under nodes, context. So this is the entry point into all the context logic. In fact, rather than dive straight in here, it would actually make more sense to look at what happens when you switch projects, which is a really good question, because I can't exactly remember where that comes in. So rather than go into the context stuff, we're going to go into the storage layer, because all of the project's logic lives in the storage, the local file system storage plugin. Projects, let's start at index.js. Now, reload active project, that's not quite what we want. Initialize project, set active project. So yeah, this is the entry point. This is where I think this is what we care about. No. So, sorry, I distracted myself. There we go. Set active project. So it calls load project with the given name, and once that's completed, it updates settings to remember what project is active. It then logs that it's changing project. So let's just have a look at the log. We should see that. Except I've got a bunch of brokers going on, but somewhere in amongst all this, there, setting active project, and the new flows file. So, oops. Sorry, I'm just killing this because it's yes, so there's those two log statements, and then it does a reload active project. So what I'm looking for is where are the hooks into the runtime to get it to change the flows that are running. And I think it's going to be reload active project. So let's go have a look at what it does. Yeah. So here you can see reload active project calls runtime.node stop flows. So that stops what's currently running. And then it calls load flows, basically telling it reload your flows, and then reloading the flows automatically starts them. So that's all it has to do. Oh, and then it emits a runtime event saying the project has changed, which is how the editor knows it's been successful. But here you can see stop flows and load flows is all it does. What's notable here is nothing happens with context. So no work is done to clear out context. So yeah, so one thing to look at briefly is let's just check, does stop flows do anything as far as context is concerned? So we come in here, I think. Stop flows bounces it. Yeah, it's a bit of a tangled web of function calls through different components. So here's stop flows, which is the locally declared function called stop. And it stops the flows, just scanning through what it does. Stops, yeah, all this code just to stop the flows. It logs things are stopping and then it emits that it's stopped. Yeah, it doesn't do anything with context, and nor should it really. You know, not sure why Mosquito's not running. Oh, why can't I remember? can never remember how to get Mosquito working. It's all this Mosquito pub. There we are. Brew services start Mosquito. And then hopefully it's going to stop complaining. Oh no, it's still complaining. Connection failed. Oh, MQTS. Oh, okay. Forget that. Yeah, so we've called stop flows and it just stops the flows. It does nothing with context, and that's the right thing for it to do. So at this point in reloading the active project, we've stopped everything running. And by the time that promise resolves, by the time this function gets called, we know for a fact it is... we know everything's stopped, and then this load flows is kind of assumes the system's in a clean state. So what we need to do here is clear context. That's all we need to do. Now, sometimes easier said than done, but that's what we want. Now it's a case of working out what we do to make that happen. So let's look at context now. And if we just go look at what functions it provides, it's got two things of interest: clean and close. So what clean does, this gets called every time you do a new deploy. And what it does is it, perhaps not as... Because context can have multiple context stores where the actual data is, the actual work to do the cleaning is sort of pushed further down. And this is an interesting challenge, actually. So, yeah, this is an interesting challenge. So, sorry. What it does is it calls clean on each of the stores, and it's given a list of all the nodes. And the reason it's given a list of all the nodes is what the clean is doing is saying, here is a list of all the nodes that still exist. Clean should delete any context that exists for nodes not on that list. Basically, it's a node that's been deleted, so we can clean, or a flow that's been deleted, we can clean up, we can remove its context. And then this then does the tidy up to delete the local context in memory. What have we got? All right, so yeah, these context objects are the sort of the API wrappers that get given to the nodes to access context in, if that makes sense. So this loop is looking for any flows that no longer exist, and if the flow doesn't exist, then we can delete all those contexts. Although, yeah, even that's not guaranteed to clean everything up. Regardless, let's carry on. So the challenge here is, at the moment, we've got nothing that will clean global context. You see, I thought this was going to be a relatively quick thing, but actually we're hate to say it, but we're at a risk of opening a can of worms. Let's delve down a bit deeper. Let's go look at, where are we in the code? So let's go look at the memory file store. So this is the default context store implementation that stores everything in memory without saving it. And here's its clean implementation. Again, remember, active nodes is an array of the IDs that still exist. So it iterates over its local data, and you can see here that if it's not, well, it will delete stuff, but it will never delete the global one because it shouldn't clean the global one. Right. Sorry, this is a can of worms. This is far more involved than I wanted to get into tonight, because I think it's not simply cleaning out the stores, it's actually you've got to refresh all the context objects, I think. Which actually means rebuilding global context from scratch. And not only clearing global context, so I'm currently calculating in my mind, do I want to try and tackle this on the live stream, or switch to one of the other project switching issues I wanted to tackle, which are all in the editor and should be fairly quick and easy to do. Do we want quick and easy, or do we want to risk worms escaping? And I know if I ask you lot, you'll want me to do the difficult stuff. Well, I don't know, maybe not. No, I think we ought to look at this. Yeah, thanks, Jim Bob. Worms indeed. I guess one of the challenges is I know the way Noxie's going for quick and easy. That's one vote each. So the reason it's a can of worms is at the moment, context is one. The context stores are an external API of Node-RED. So there could be other implementations, and I know there are other implementations of context. And the problem we have is I don't believe on the existing API let me just check on what I'm saying makes sense. On the existing API, there's not an efficient function call to be made to tell it to clear out global context as well as everything else. This clean function, which I've talked about, is easy to clean out all context other than global because you pass in an empty array. And remember that this active nodes array is the list of node IDs that still exist. And if a context store is holding context for an ID that doesn't exist in that array, it can delete it as part of this clean. But the implementations we have for clean ignore global because, well, in normal operation of Node-RED, there is no scenario where you want to clean global context. So my instinctive suggestion would be to, update the API and say, well, we'll just pass in a second flag, clean global. And if that flag's set, then do whatever you need to do to clean the global context as well. But because this is a public API and people may have implemented it, changing this API is not a minor change, although it's an entirely backwards compatible API change, adding another property here doesn't, well, assuming no one's written bad code that calls clean, they've written code clean with 2 arguments, which would be ignored today, you'd be fine. But we can't it's always an interesting conundrum. Do we update the API as part of a bug fix and then get all of the context store implementations to be updated to implement it properly? Or do we find a workaround? And the more I think about it, there is a workaround. So we can actually implement a fix for this using the existing API. Or we do a bit of both, in that we oh yes, we can do a bit of both. We're going to do it the longhand way first. And what, you may ask, is the longhand way? Well, we have on the API already this keys function. And keys is there to return a list of the key values in a given context scope. So scope is it global? Is it what flow is it? Is it node? What, all that sort of stuff. So what we can actually do is use the keys API to get a list of all the key objects, and then we can use the delete API to delete. We can. Ooh. One moment. One short moment. Let me just. I've forgotten our own API. Yeah, light bulb, absolutely, Jimbo. There is a delete function. And we can just call delete with global. Curious. Let's have a look at the local file system. What does delete do in this implementation? Delete. So delete, sure enough, will remove, get storage path. Yeah. That knows how to do it. Yeah. Oh. Okay, I take back everything I've been saying. We have the APIs for it. That makes that a lot easier. Let's take a step back up. So now we're back looking at sort of the top level context API. This is the interface that the project's API is able to call. And here we have delete context. Yeah, so what does delete context do? Only context if there's no... Okay, so this isn't quite what we want. Because this... Yeah. There's an edge case here to do with preserving our behavior. In fact, I just want to go look at... I want to find... Where do we call context.delete? So we call context.delete whenever a node is closing. Right. As basically, whenever a node is being stopped, it tells context to delete its own context. Because that used to be the behavior. Whenever you hit deploy, we used to wipe out individual node context. When we introduced the persistent context and the context stores, we changed that behavior slightly, but we did keep the old behavior lying round, for better or worse. And right now it's possibly for worse, but what is has configured store doing for us? Yeah, so has configured store is a flag we set if the user has set a non-default context store configuration. Or, yeah, even if they've set what matches the default, they've set it. But if they haven't set it, if it's a settings file that does not have context storage in, and before I finish that sentence, let's just go have a look at our default settings file. So you can see, yeah, our default settings file does not have context storage set. So for the vast majority of users, then this is the code path they will hit. And we only call this for individual nodes. Otherwise, we know effectively no op it. We don't do anything. So given we only call this when with an ID of a node, that's okay. We could actually it would be an entirely new scenario where we call delete with an ID set to global, because we don't do that at all today. So if ID equals global, do something else. Oh, I can tell I can tell I didn't write this code because it hasn't got the white space. That might be unfair. That might have been me, but it doesn't feel like it. So if ID is global, what do? We need to delete global from all configured stores. We need to delete and reinitialize global context object. Those are the two things we need to do. Although I'm tempted to separate out delete. Yeah, I'm going to separate out. Oops. Delete global context, reinitialize global context. The reason I separate those out is I might change whose responsibility the reinitialization is. Right now, global context is a bit funny because, again, if you're familiar with Node-RED, in your settings file, you can use function global context to seed values into global context. Which is why, yeah, it's a bit different. We can't just delete it because we need to reset it back to a clean initial state. So here you can see we set up global context here. What I'm going to change this to is add a function called getGlobalContext, and we are going to do if context.has own property. Can't type. In fact, we're going to negate that. So if the context object being our local cache of all the contexts. If it doesn't contain global, then we are going to initialize it. And then we're going to return context global. Okay. This may or may not be a good thing we're doing. What I'm now interested in is wherever we try and access global context, rather than access it via this context object directly, we can call get global context. So that means it will get no, I take this back. Scrap this idea. Basically, I was going to change it to, if we change it to call this function whenever we want to access it, and it will initialize it if it hasn't been initialized. I was losing sight of the fact we're trying to solve the extreme edge case where someone is switching projects. The rest of the time, global context never gets deleted. So in fact, putting into the main path this logic is a nonsense overhead to add. So what we're going to do, in fact, is rather than call it get global context, we're going to call this initialize global context. And we'll call it as we were in the init function there. And then back down where we had our delete. For step 3, real initialize global context, we'll just call that function there. So we've done step 3. Now we've just got to work our way back up this list. So to delete global context, then what we want to do is, in fact, we can just do delete from that object. I think that's all we need to do. I mean, technically, initialize global context will overwrite that object. So calling that delete is, you can see here, we just overwrite it. So even that delete isn't strictly necessary, but nor does it harm to have one extra line of code in this code path. Again, this is the extreme edge case where a user is changing what project they're editing. So now this is the slightly more interesting case where we need to delete from all the context stores. Yeah, so I'm just looking through for a pattern. I think this is probably the best pattern. So, we're going to build up an array of promises. We iterate over all the stores. Then we call stores. Not going to call clean. We want to call stores dot delete global. Is that right? I think that's right, isn't it? Delete, just pass in the string global, awesome source. Okay. So at this point, promises is an array of promises. So we're going to do return promises. No, sorry. Promise.all promises. So that gives us a promise that won't resolve until all of the promises in the array resolve. Then we are going to that's where we can do 2 and 3. And I think that's all we have to do. I think that means we will we ask all the stores to delete their global context. We wait for that to finish. We then delete the global context object, and then we reinitialize global context. You know what? I think we're sort of done here. The only risk by blowing away global and recreating it is is there a chance that anyone else could have a handle on that object that we've deleted and we are going to recreate? They shouldn't. That isn't what the code is meant to do. No one should be caching those values. But yeah, we'll check it out in a minute. Okay, so where have we got to? So delete now does what we want. So let's switch back to our project switching code, which I think is here, clear context. So what we want to do at this point is to call runtime dot, and now this is a good question. Runtime dot what? This is where our APIs in this area are a little bit muddled. Do we... I'm just trying to see, do we actually expose the context APIs at all? No, we don't. That's a bit of a pain. Right, too many open windows. So red.nodes, sorry, internal API, just checking what objects, yeah, we export nodes. We don't export context on our internal API. Is there a reason not to export context on the internal API? I always get hesitant adding stuff here because the more we add in here, the more right nodes might delve into the internals of the code and access things we'd rather they didn't. Because either we add context here as a sort of a peer to nodes and flows, whereas in the code, logically, context lives under the nodes code. And yeah, the nodes object already exports a ton of stuff. Not all of it coming out of nodes. So it has registry stuff, it's got flow stuff, credentials, and then context. So it has got some context stuff. It's got load, close, list, get context. It's probably going to be cleanest here to... oh, I almost did it, but I pulled back at the last moment. No, we're going to do it here. We're going to have... should we call it clear context? No. Or should we? Yes, we should. Clear context. We'll call a function called clear on the context API, which doesn't exist. We're going to go write it. I'm going to add in right here, clear. And then for our own benefit, we'll just add a quick bit of docs. Deletes all context store contexts, including global, and reinitializes global to initial state. Okay, so what do we want to do? We want to start by calling, going to call clean with an empty array. So if you remember this, empty array tells it there are no valid nodes, so delete anything that's not a node. Sorry, there are no valid nodes, so delete all flow and node contexts. Then what we're going to do is call delete context global. Let's put some returns in here or this isn't going to work. Yeah, in fact that's all we have to do. So we'll call clean, which returns a promise. When that completes, we'll then call delete context global and return. And the way promises work, I won't try and explain it, but that, yeah, the promises all percolate up. Is that what I called it? Did I call it clear context? I did. Clear context. Right, so we're now going to stop the flows. We then call our new clear context function. And then when that's done, we'll then do load flows. Yeah. Right. Oh, look, the broker is... Oh, no. Oh, forget it. Right, let's see. What have we got? Let's clear that. Let's check out global context. So everything is empty, as it should be. What I'm missing here are the actual... Yeah, okay. We're just going to switch back to this project. Ooh, error. Of course, okay. We've done our first test. We've tried switching project and we've received an error. So let's go look at the console. Type. Unfortunately, we don't get much info. Cannot convert undefined or null to object. That's not so good. Imagine any error is going to actually be coming up here. So console.log. .stack. So no, it's not. No, it's not there. So it's this call. If there's an error being thrown in here, it's this then, which is going to be returning the error. I'll continue to rethrow it just to keep things happy. Right. That's now done its thing. Let's reload Node-RED. See where we've got to. Okay, so it has switched projects. What I'm gonna no, we're just gonna go for it here. I'm going to inject these two contexts values. So there we've got test is now set, flow is now set. Oh, but we know there's an error of some sort. Yeah, hit the error. Let's go look at the console. Oh, I would have expected that error to have reached this point. Tell you what, let's put it one level up. That There we are. Right. So it's at function.keys, runtime context index 850. Runtime context index 850. No, not 850, 580. Which is right where we are here. Okay. Yeah, my bad. So I'm calling clean with an empty array, but I shouldn't be passing an empty array. The argument is actually a flow config object. So rather than an empty array, I've got to pass in an object with all nodes as an empty object. And you know what? That's a bit boilerplate-ish. What we can do in here is flow config equals flow config, or let's default it to an empty object. That's just a bit nicer. So now you can call clean directly, not have to worry about the argument, and we'll initialize the value in the function where we want to use it to do the right thing. So let's switch project. Okay. All right, so we are getting errors. Oh, you're right, you can set, I always forget, yeah, set default values in the function declaration. I'm still too wedded in my older JavaScript ways and inherently keeping support for old versions of Node that we don't need to support anymore. So, old habits. But where are we at? We're at cannot redefine property get. Okay. So this is in create context. All right. Yeah. Got to be in the right place to do that. Create context. Oh, this is where it gets, yeah. This is where some early design choice in Node-RED might trip us up. So, what are we doing here? We're reinitializing global context, and we call create context with the seed value being the function global context object from the settings. Yeah, so hold that in your head. Seed is actually a pointer to function global context from your settings object. And so we call create context, which is seed. As you see here, seed is only set for global context. So let's look at how we use seed. We set create a local variable called object, sets to seed, and if seed isn't passed in, then it's given as a brand new object. Then if seed exists, so this whole block is to do with handling function global context. It gets all the keys, i.e. all the existing objects, all the existing properties in that object. Then, what's it doing? So it sets up seed keys and it defines this insert seed values. Why? What is this doing? I think I know what this is doing, but okay, I'm just going to hide that for the moment. Point being, and this is where we're going to get unstuck. This is what's actually going to blow out of the water everything I've spent the last 30 minutes working on. When we create the context, we pass in the seed object, and it's this line here. Obj is what, badly named variable, but it is what the context is. It's the object that is the context. This is the object that's going to contain the context values for this context scope. And because we do this, we either seed it with function global context or a brand new object. So if you have function global context set, we are reusing function global context as the global context object. So when we come down here, when we create a context, we define a get function, a set function, keys function. This is the API into a context that you'll use if you use flow.get, flow.set, flow.keys. These are the functions you are calling. And we define them on the object. Because this has to deal with accessing the context stores and all the different variations of the API, passing in an array, passing in a callback, doing it asynchronously, doing it synchronously, and all that jazz. So yeah, does all this work? It's not an array. Sorry, here we are. Right, I realise I've gone quiet because I'm deep in thought. So this is the get function on a context, and it does all this work up here to what's it? Sorry, it does that. It validates you've passed in a valid context key. Then if the key is not an array, then it's a key to a context store. But where's the globalness going on up here? No, sorry. This is getting a hold of a proper reference to the context storage that should be used for. Yeah. Then context. So then it comes down here, and here we go. If you haven't provided a seed, which means we're not in global context, then we can just call get on the context store that we've resolved to. But if seed does exist, we still call get on the context store we've resolved to, in memory, file system, what have you. And then, depending on the result, it does this insert seed values, because there might not be, the value in the context store might be undefined. And if it's undefined, we then have to go to the seed to you're kind of about really convert your vars to console.let. Yeah, I mean, the whole code base is 8 years old, so predates a lot of that in terms of node support. So yeah, there is a task to go through, but there is a task to be done to go through and tidy that up. But it's also a degree of busy work that there's not a lot of value to be had doing that if you're not in there modifying the code anyway. You could argue we're in there modifying the code now, so this would be a perfect opportunity to do that, but yeah, it's yeah, that is not a minor change to do in a bug fix release, because the chances of that sort of systemic change in a code base could well introduce bugs that are subtle and needlessly introduced. So I'm not saying it's a good thing. All new code does use constant lets, but we're really in quite old code here, which is why I'm struggling just to get the logic straight in my head of what it's actually doing. Well, yeah, exactly. Yes, the code will be properly documented as I figure this out. But it's also quite boring for a stream to watch me sit here writing documentation. But you're right, it will be. Like I said at the start of this is a can of worms, and I'm deep in that can of worms at the moment, trying to provide an informative stream to the audience rather than mumbling about seed values and the like. So, right, step back. What we're actually trying to solve here. The problem we've got is it's not a simple task just to reinitialize the global context object, because the global context object reuses the function global context object from your settings file. It's the very same object loaded into memory. So we can't actually restore it back to its original state because we don't have its original state anywhere anymore. That is how the code currently operates, because we've never had a need to be able to reset global context back to its initial state until trying to fix this bug. So this bug has revealed the deficiencies of that approach. So what I'm currently trying to do is think through, and trying to think through verbally to bring you with me, how best to modify the approach of how we use functional global context in a way that is not going to change a single bit of behavior that users might rely on in terms of how the object is handled and how you can inject things in your settings file and access them in the flow. That's the tricky bit. But it should be entirely doable. And I think the starting point is, well, at some point we need to change this line, which is the actual context store, we shouldn't be setting it to seed. It should always be a brand new object. And then if seed exists, that's where our insert seed values comes into play. The problem is the legacy way of accessing context. So let's see if the docs talk about this. I'm pretty sure they do. Working with context in a function node. Where is it? Storing data. So there are two ways to interact with context. There is flow.get, flow.set, which is the proper way of interacting with context. But what you can also do, and I'm just trying to see whether we have left it in the docs, and we haven't, which is probably a good thing, but I know it's... It's not in the docs, but the way you always used to access context before we added the get and set functions was you could just write code global.foo equals 123. So you could just completely ignore get and set. No. It's okay. Just need to restart the runtime because we're in this weird failed project switch attempt. Just gonna export that, reload, because it switched projects on us. Yeah, let's import. Okay, maybe. Oh, I don't know. Right. So what's the function node? Curious, what's the function node complaining about? And there's a linting error on the function node. Oh yeah. Function node has no name. Oh, forget that. Right. In fact, I'm going to turn off the linter for now because it's just distracting me at the moment. In fact, no, I'm not, because we haven't got a clear. I'm sure I added a button to clear the lint results. Anyway, where was I? Global.foo equals 123. You can do that, and if I inject that and hit reload global context there is empty. But if I create another flow down here, which sets message.payload to global.foo, and we inject that. Oh no, okay, that one and then that one. Ooh, undefined. Now that's curious. This used to work. Why does that not? Maybe it's this context.global.foo. See, this is what I mean. There is a legacy API that flows out there will still rely on for interacting with context. So we inject that and then there we go. So context.global gives you access to the raw context object and you can set properties on it directly. And we need to make sure that still works. Right. Yeah, this is kind of hairy, and it's one of those changes that trying to talk through on a live stream is prone for error. So I know this is pretty well unit test covered, but the unit test will cover the scenarios we deal with. We're trying to introduce a whole new scenario where we reinitialize global context, so we won't have unit tests for that. So maybe another approach is to spend a bit of time writing the unit tests for the behavior we want. That would probably make some amount of sense, but again, not necessarily the interesting stream content. Right, let me see what we're going to do. You know what I think is okay. If we initialize object to be an empty object, then what we're going to do is basically we need to isolate seed so it can't be modified, so that we're able to restore from it every time. So break the link there, And, you know, let's, as was suggested. Oh, can't make that. We'll change some of these as we go. I'm not going to go systematically through the whole file, but so if seed is set, so we get seed keys as the key values. What we can do here is we can also move to arrow functions in more places is the other good thing. We iterate over those keys and we can just copy from the seed object over to obj. Now, a really important point this. If someone defines an object in function global context, and then they have a project which modifies that object, they then switch projects, they will still have that modified object. I'm not going to try and fix that because that would require cloning, and that gets fraught because one of the reasons of using function global context is you can insert stuff that doesn't clone. You can insert, stuff that doesn't clone. So again, we are thinking of edge cases, which I don't want to get too carried away with. But I think this relatively simple change will set up obj to contain everything that's in function global context, but critically, we can recreate it because we aren't modifying the seed object anywhere. Nowhere do we actually modify seed. Let's see if that's true. Right. So, which workspace are we in? We are in here. So let's just inject some context stuff. So we've got global context value is set there. We're going to go and open up the release video, and it has allowed us to change project, which is good. Let's just check the console. No errors. So we've changed the project. Stop flow, started flows, no errors. And if we refresh global context, the value disappears. Awesome. Let me just off screen, just in case. Let me go have a look at I'm having a look at what I've got in function global context. And I have got, I've got nothing, which isn't so good. So I'm just putting some initial data in function global context via my settings file. Cool. Trigger a restart. So if we refresh global, okay, it is empty. But that's okay because it doesn't export the keys of function global context by default. I'm going to set message.payload to global dot something. And I say dot something because it was but 2 minutes ago I set something in my settings file and I can't remember what I called it. I called it from settings file. So via my settings file, I'm setting a global context property called from settings file. Inject it. What do we get? We get hello. So that's worked. So if I export that, and now if I switch projects and import that, deploy and inject, we still get hello. So switching projects, we aren't. When I switch projects, I still have the contents of function global context from my settings file available. Like I said, there's nothing that's. Oh, sorry, that's the other test. Is as I showed you, I can set global.foo. Oh no, I can't. I can. Let's try message.payload equals context.global. No. Kind of sort of global from settings file. Yep, from settings file, deploy, run that. So that gets hello as well. So again, we haven't screwed up accessing global context via the object, and global.get that works. Cool. So yeah, I think this has actually fixed it, which is nice. Yeah. So like I said, the edge case upon edge case that doesn't address is if they modify function global context in a flow, changing projects won't restore it back to the original values. That's yeah. I think we can cope with that. I mean, that can just be a limitation for now. It's better than it was. We are clearing out things properly that we weren't before. One thing we should now do, and again, it's 23 minutes past, so 23 minutes past, and the front door's just closed, which means it is cup of tea time. So here we have the context unit tests, which does a whole bunch of stuff. So what I'm going to do off stream is add in some unit tests for the new functions we've added. Add in unit tests for delete context when you pass in global is one. So this chunk of code. So being able to actually delete global context and ensuring it gets reinitialized. That's one. The other is this new clear function that does a clean, which will delete all context for flows and nodes, and call delete context. So yeah, a few bits and pieces there to write unit tests for, but it is 25 past. I've been going plenty long enough. I have to say, this has taken. I do slightly regret starting with this one. I'm glad we got that issue in at the start that was a literal 5-minute fix and pull requests submitted. I will just show you one of the other issues is to do with switching projects that is on my to-do list. I hope to get to tonight. Maybe we'll do them next week. Notice how my tab bar. Notice how I'm scrolled all the way to the right hand end. If I go and open another flow, oh look, yeah, something funky's gone on here. Okay, this wasn't on my list, but it is now. Look how I've got two flow ones and they both appear active. In fact, they both appear to be the same flow. No, actually, this one is on my list, but it's surfaced slightly differently. You can see I'm now getting errors down here when I try clicking on other tabs. So, yeah, something can go wrong. It doesn't go wrong every time. I think there must be a timing issue, he says, but actually, let's just try it. How reproducible is that? Switch projects. Yeah, because in all the stuff I was doing, I was fiddling with the tab that was open. If I Yeah, see here I can quite successfully switch tabs. Let's try going back again. I mean, there is an issue here where it's scrolling me all the way to the end, even though the active tab is back here at the start. So that's one bug to fix, is we should make sure the active tab is visible. Yeah, and well, one sec. Hold on, what project am I on? Right. I think there's a bigger problem going on here. Let's just switch back to the info tab. My face down there. Let's switch to second project. Okay. Let's go to first project. I'm slightly intrigued that what's gone on here. First project and release video have got the same flows suddenly. Yeah, so linter test flows is good. Now, have I mucked this up? Yeah, they've got identical flows. I think I've mucked this up when I tried switching projects, hit the bugs, they didn't switch in the UI, but in the back end they had switched. I then hit deploy and I've overwritten one project with another project's flows. I think that's what's happened. Which is not ideal, but thankfully all my projects are actually pretty throwaway. Because, yeah, the things got interrupted at a point that they don't get interrupted. But it's also 9:30, so I'm going to add this to my list of project switching issues to continue looking at. And like I say, maybe I'll come back to it next week. Just from the chat, we say, so you're using 1.x at the moment of Node-RED. Anything you should be scared of when upgrading to 2.x? Well, go read the release notes. Nothing to be scared of. Just make sure you're on up-to-date Node.js version, and be aware the HTML node and the HTTP request nodes, the underlying modules they both use, have had major version changes significantly. We've suddenly, I believe, flushed out all the HTTP request node bugs or issues with that migration. The HTML node, there's some edge cases where its behavior has changed due to how the underlying module changed its behavior, and we just haven't been able to code around those changes. So yeah, otherwise it should be pretty plain sailing. I mean, the reason for the major version update was dropping the old versions of Node.js. It wasn't that there's been any major rewrites of major components, aside from those two nodes that I mentioned. So yeah. Your other question about UI, so 99.9% of the UI testing is manual. Some work was done to set up UI testing, and a basic framework for UI testing using, WebDriver, but not very many tests then got written making use of it. Part of the challenge is tests are just so brittle and sensitive to UI changes that, just the way they have to work. Go click an element with this ID. Well, if we want to change any sort of structural elements, and you might argue then, well, that's the cost. That's why you have tests. You should update your tests, but we don't have the resource. And when I say we, again, 95% of the UI work is me. So it's one of the reasons we bring in the beta tests. The beta releases is obviously there are a number of people who follow the dev code as we're developing new stuff, and that helps get stuff spotted. But inevitably there will be things that we don't spot. But yeah, it is a challenge. That's for sure. And suddenly, it shouldn't be this way, but learning from whenever an issue creeps out and gets past us and gets released, like in the recent 2.1 release, there was a few bugs with the typed input widget, this standard widget we use in tons of places. And on the back of that, I think I spent some time last week, I do now have this node set up running. Well, it's a whole bunch of test cases. They are manual in the sense that I have to open this up and look, do all of these things look okay? But under the covers, it's making a lot of function calls. The net result is what you see here should look like what it looks like here. So, we've got to learn from when things sneak out and try and improve our coverage, whether it's manual or what other processes we might have. And there's some things like switching projects. There are just so many moving parts. It's hard to automate tests for, and it's of questionable return on investment type of thing of, this health check, that's it really. It's, and that's what I quite liked about, here, you see 3 rows that look identical, but under the covers, the order it makes a series of API calls on the typed input are completely different. And in fact, this one, it calls like a dozen different APIs, switching between types, bouncing around all over the place before ending back on a string type with a value of foo. Whenever I open this up, it's running a bunch of code and I just have to visually check. And it would be really hard to write a automated test that told me these 3 UI elements all looked identical. It would be hard to write that test in a sustainable way. But there we are. That's what we've done. So I've got more to do on what we've been playing with tonight, this bug fix, but some clear things to go through. And as Nathanault, if that's how we pronounce you, suggested, absolutely, I'm going to try and go back through this and add some more documentation comments into the code to reflect what I've had to rediscover from code I've not looked at for a year or two. And there's some other stuff like we have, even though we use promises in quite a few places, because until it was only April this year, we dropped Node 8 support. So it was only April this year that we could start using async await more extensively. So there's a few places in here where we use promises and the nesting is real. which can be tidied up quite a lot by shifting some of these to be async functions rather than not. But again, not making changes for the sake of it, but where there's a clear benefit to improving the readability and maintainability of the code, then that's going to be worthwhile. Cool. Well, that's it for this week. Like I said, I will make some bit more progress on this in downtime. This week is more a Flowforge company work week rather than a Node-RED open source week. So I may well return to, if not this issue, some of the other project switching issues on next Monday's live stream. Unless, of course, there's something else you're interested in seeing. If there's an area of the code you'd like to learn more about, then just shout, ask in the chat here on Slack. Ping me ahead of time. Ping me ahead of time is probably best than trying to ask me on the stream to cover something there and then. But I hope it's interesting. I hope that's useful. I find it useful to work through issues, and I do prefer the ones where we are able to get to the point where there is a pull request at the end of the live stream or just after the live stream. This one has been a bit of a rediscovery of the code, so I hope it was interesting. But there we are. Right, I'm going to sign off. Thank you all for joining, especially the first-time joiners, first-time chatters. Great to have you on board. I'm here every Monday, 8 p.m. I realised this week in the UK our clocks went back at the weekend, so this is the 1 week where the US and the UK time difference is off by an hour. Next week, I believe the US clocks go back this coming weekend, so everything will be back to how it has been. Otherwise, I'll speak to you then. Take care. Take it easy. That's enough drivel from me. I always do this. I need a shortcut key to do this. Good night.